The front door creaked open to a silence that felt unnatural. A house once alive with children's laughter now stood frozen. Still, cold. Sheila Bellush's teenage daughter stepped cautiously inside. At first, the house looked normal. Too normal, the television sat dark, the kitchen untouched. But a mother's voice that should have filled the air was missing, and that silence felt louder than anything she had ever heard. Then came the discovery. In the master bedroom, her world collapsed. Her mother lay on the floor, lifeless. A brutal scene no child should ever witness. This was no accident, no random break-in. The violence was deliberate. Someone wanted Sheila gone. Someone planned this. The Bellush home, once a place of safety, had become a crime scene that would shock the nation. But before the world could understand the brutality of that day, we must first understand the woman at the center of it all, Sheila Bellush, who she was, and why someone wanted her gone. But before we dive deeper into this chilling case, I'd love to hear from you. Go down to the comments and tell me two things: where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is right now as you're listening. It's always incredible to see how true crime connects people across every corner of the globe at every hour of the day. And yes, I'll be reading through them. So don't be shy. And while you're here, if you enjoy deep dives into cases like this, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. It's a simple click, but it helps more than you know. And it means you'll never miss the next story we uncover together. To understand the horror of that day, we must first understand the woman whose life was stolen. Sheila Bellush was more than just a name in a headline. She was a mother, a wife, a daughter. And to those who knew her, she was the heart of her family. She was love in motion. Sheila was raising 6 children from her second marriage and 2 young quadruplets from her third. Her home was alive with constant energy. The shuffle of little feet, the clatter of toys, the bedtime routines that defined her nights. It was demanding, but to Sheila it was everything. Her role as their mother gave her strength, and her joy was measured in the smiles of her children. She lived for them, and it was that devotion that made her both extraordinary and vulnerable. Her path to this life had not been simple. She had endured a bitter and controlling divorce that left her wounded, yet she rebuilt herself piece by piece, moving forward with quiet strength, determined that her children would grow up in an environment of safety and joy. She refused to let her past define the future she was building. By 1997, Sheila had built a peaceful life in Sarasota, Florida. Her days were ordinary. School runs, family dinners, the warmth of small-town living. She laughed more. She smiled more. For the first time in years, happiness seemed within reach. But peace can be fragile. And behind her new beginning, someone from her past was quietly waiting. A shadow that would soon step back into her life and change everything. Even as Sheila embraced her new life in Florida, pieces of her past clung stubbornly to her. She had walked away from a relationship that left her drained and fearful, a relationship marked not by love, but by control. He had once been the center of her world, but when she broke free, he never truly let her go. Freedom gave her peace, but it also made her a target. Friends recall how Sheila often carried a quiet unease, a sense that moving hundreds of miles away might not be far enough. She rarely spoke of her ex, but those who knew her could see it. The traces of fear she tried to bury. His presence wasn't gone. It lingered in the back of her mind, unspoken but alive. Because some shadows don't disappear, they wait for the right moment to return. The man she once loved lived states away, in Texas. To outsiders, he appeared successful, charming, a family man who had rebuilt after divorce. But to those who knew the truth, he carried something darker inside, an anger that never healed, a bitterness that grew sharper with time. Even as she laughed with her children, someone was still watching, still plotting. Sheila's fresh start in Sarasota was fragile. Each step forward carried the hidden weight of her past. She didn't know it, but while she was nurturing her children and building a new life, the man she once left behind was nurturing something else, an obsession, a plan, a secret life in Texas that was about to collide with hers. And when those two worlds met, the results would be devastating. The Florida sun rose quietly over Sheila's home, painting the morning in soft light. Her twins' laughter filled the air, and for a moment, life seemed untouched by shadows. She had built a sanctuary, far from the chaos of her past, where her children could grow in safety. But sometimes, the most fragile piece is the one we cling to the hardest, because deep down, we know it can shatter. But while Sheila was nurturing peace in Florida, in Texas, a far darker presence was taking shape. Alan Blackthorne, her ex-husband, wore the mask of a successful man. To the outside world, he was wealthy, influential, untouchable. Yet those who truly knew him understood the truth. His charm could curdle in an instant. His temper was a fuse waiting to be lit. And beneath his polished image, one obsession remained: Sheila, the woman he no longer controlled. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Sheila's calm mornings in Sarasota and Alan's simmering rage back in Texas. To her, Florida was freedom. To him, it was loss. The woman he once controlled had slipped beyond his reach. And for a man like Alan, that wasn't something he could forgive. It was never just distance separating them. It was tension stretching thinner by the day. Sheila's sanctuary felt safe, but Alan's bitterness was sharpening into something far more dangerous. The storm was no longer just brewing in Texas. It was already moving toward Florida. And soon, that storm takes its first step out of the shadows. The quiet of a Florida morning shattered in an instant. What should have been a safe, ordinary day for Sheila Bellush and her children became the moment everything collapsed. Inside the home she had built with such care, violence struck with merciless force. The scene that followed was not just a crime. It was a nightmare that no one could have imagined. This was not random. This was personal. Her children, young and vulnerable, were there when the chaos unfolded. The sounds, the confusion, the fear, they would carry it with them forever. For Sheila, there was no escape. The brutality of the attack showed not only a will to harm, but a chilling determination to silence her completely. It wasn't just a murder. It was a message, delivered with terrifying finality. When police and emergency responders arrived, they were confronted with devastation. Officers who had seen countless crime scenes stood shaken. The sheer cruelty of what had been done stunned even the most seasoned investigators. And at the center of it all were 6 children, their world forever altered, their mother gone in an instant. The crime scene was not just evidence. It was heartbreak carved into reality. What began as whispers of a troubled past had now exploded into tragedy. Florida's sanctuary had been breached, leaving questions that demanded answers. Who had carried out such savagery, and why? To understand that, investigators would need to pull back the layers of Sheila's life and uncover the dangerous ties that reached far beyond her quiet Sarasota home. The quiet Sarasota neighborhood was suddenly crawling with flashing lights and uniformed officers. Inside the house, investigators moved cautiously, documenting every trace of evidence. What they saw was not the chaos of a burglary gone wrong. It was something far more deliberate. Every detail of the scene whispered one truth: Sheila had been targeted. Detectives quickly noted the brutality of the crime. Valuables in plain sight were untouched. Doors showed no sign of forced entry. The precision of the attack stood out. It wasn't the random act of a stranger. This was planned, methodical, cold. The evidence didn't just rule out chance. It pointed directly toward intent. Someone wanted Sheila silenced, and they had come prepared to do it. But who could hate Sheila enough to do this? That was the question that haunted detectives as they spoke with friends, family, and neighbors. On the surface, Sheila had built a new, happy life. Yet as investigators dug deeper, they discovered the shadows of her past were not so easily erased. Old wounds, old battles, and someone who had never truly let go. The trail of evidence was not just inside the home. It stretched back into the chapters of her life she had tried hardest to escape. For police, the picture was becoming clearer. The killer wasn't a faceless intruder. He was someone connected to her story, someone with motive, someone who believed they had unfinished business. And as investigators followed the threads of Sheila's past, they began to uncover dangerous motives lurking in the shadows, a trail that would soon lead them closer to the man behind it all. To the outside world, Alan Blackthorne seemed like the kind of man others admired. A wealthy golf course developer, a father, a polished figure in his Texas community. He moved in circles of influence, wearing the image of a man who had built his success with charm and determination. But beneath that carefully constructed image, something far more dangerous lurked. As detectives dug deeper, stories began to emerge. Friends and acquaintances whispered about his temper, about his need for control, about the way he could turn from charming to cold in an instant. Those closest to Sheila remembered the toll their marriage had taken on her spirit. The fear, the intimidation, the years of emotional battles that had left scars long before divorce. It became clear that Alan's success was only a mask, and behind it was a man driven less by love and more by obsession. It was during these conversations that his name first surfaced in the investigation. No evidence yet, no smoking gun, just patterns, stories, memories that painted the image of a man who had never truly let Sheila go. He knew she had found peace in Florida, and to him, that peace was an insult, a wound to his pride. Investigators began to suspect what Sheila may have always feared, that even hundreds of miles away, Alan's reach still loomed over her life. The cracks in his image were starting to show, but suspicion wasn't enough. Investigators needed something concrete, something they could trace and prove. And soon, the money trail would reveal more than whispers ever could, pointing directly toward a conspiracy that stretched from Texas to Florida. As investigators pressed further, the whispers around Alan Blackthorne began to take shape. If he had truly wanted Sheila gone, he would never have done it himself. He had the money, he had the connections, and he had the cold determination to keep his own hands clean. Detectives started to follow a trail, not of fingerprints or DNA, but of people. People who may have been pulled into a deadly plan stretching across state lines. The path led from Texas to Florida. Along the way, names surfaced: associates, intermediaries, men who had no direct reason to hate Sheila, yet found themselves tangled in a plot designed to end her life. It became clear this wasn't a crime of passion, carried out in the heat of the moment. It was calculated, organized, commissioned. Each new name pulled detectives deeper into a web that stretched across states, revealing a network built for one chilling purpose: murder by design. But what struck investigators most was the emotional weight of it all. To think that someone once tied to Sheila by marriage, by children, by years of shared history, could orchestrate her violent end from a distance. The cruelty wasn't just in the act itself. It was in the deliberate choice to turn her life into a target. It wasn't only about ending Sheila's story. It was about erasing her peace. Now, with intermediaries identified, detectives were closer than ever to exposing the truth. But suspicion wasn't enough. They needed hard evidence that could tie every link of the chain back to its source. And as the net began to tighten, the investigation would close in on the men who pulled the strings and the powerful figure who had set the plan in motion. The investigation had been a slow, careful climb, threading through names, money, and whispered accounts. But now, the web began to unravel. What detectives uncovered was not just shocking. It was chilling. Sheila Bellush had not been the victim of a random act of violence. She had been marked, chosen, and someone had ordered her death. That someone was her ex-husband, Alan Blackthorne. To the outside world, he was successful, charming, untouchable. But beneath the facade was a storm of resentment that refused to die. Detectives uncovered a chilling truth. Alan had set in motion a deadly chain, using intermediaries to mask his hands in crime. It wasn't just murder. It was calculated punishment, a message delivered in blood because Sheila dared to live a life without him. And now, investigators understood this was not the work of chance. It was the work of obsession. The truth hit like a second blow. This wasn't just about control. It wasn't just about anger. It was about power, about making sure Sheila could never live freely beyond his shadow. The calculated way he distanced himself, hiding behind hired hands, revealed not only guilt, but an almost chilling detachment. To Alan, Sheila wasn't just his ex-wife. She was unfinished business. With this revelation, the case shifted from mystery to manhunt. Detectives were no longer piecing together fragments of suspicion. They had the blueprint of a conspiracy. The task ahead was monumental: unraveling the layers of middlemen, money trails, and silent accomplices who had turned Alan's fury into action. Each clue tightened the noose around him. Each witness pulled the truth closer into the light. And as the walls closed in, the fight for justice was about to collide with its most dangerous chapter yet. Prosecutors now faced the daunting task of proving Alan Blackthorne's hand in Sheila's murder. Paper trails and whispers would not be enough. They needed evidence that spoke louder than his money, louder than his carefully polished reputation. And so they began to piece it together, thread by thread, until the web of deceit became undeniable. Every document, every call, every connection mattered. The financial records told their own damning story. Transfers that looked ordinary at first glance grew darker when aligned with the timeline of Sheila's death. Each number carried weight. Each movement of money, another link in the chain that bound Alan to the crime. It wasn't just accounting, it was motive, mapped out in black and white. And when money leaves footprints, they are often the hardest to erase. But perhaps the most devastating blows came from those who once stood close to him. Witnesses describe a man whose charm was nothing more than a mask. They spoke of manipulation, of his obsession with control, of the venom he carried for Sheila even after their divorce. Words once spoken in private were now echoed in court, stripped bare under oath. And those words painted Alan not as a grieving ex-husband, but as a man who plotted revenge. Yet the deepest wound revealed in the courtroom was not financial or forensic. It was human. Sheila's children, left without their mother, stood as living proof of what had been taken from them. Their pain became the most powerful evidence of all, a reminder that this case was not just about transactions and testimonies, but about a family torn apart forever. And as prosecutors built their case brick by brick, the stage was set for the moment everyone had been waiting for, the trial, where every secret would finally be dragged into the light. In court, Alan Blackthorne presented himself as the picture of confidence, a wealthy businessman, a man of charm and influence. To the outside world, he was untouchable, polished, composed, smiling as though life was still a game played on golf courses and in private clubs. But masks only hold for so long before the cracks begin to show. Behind that polished exterior, prosecutors stripped away the facade piece by piece. They revealed a man who could not accept rejection, who saw Sheila's independence as a personal insult. Every call, every payment, every witness brought the truth closer into focus. This was not the story of a grieving ex-husband. It was a story of a man who planned her destruction with precision, and the mask he had worn for so long was now collapsing under the weight of evidence. Jurors listened as those closest to Alan spoke of his hatred, his control, his manipulation. The image of a successful family man shattered with every word, replaced by the portrait of someone who had turned his personal grudge into a deadly mission. The contrast was impossible to ignore. On one side, the smiling businessman. On the other, the architect of Sheila's death. Still, even with the mountain of evidence, one question lingered. Could Alan Blackthorne truly be held accountable, or would his fortune and influence once again shield him from consequence? The courtroom was now a battleground, not just for facts, but for justice itself. And as the trial reached its breaking point, all eyes turned toward the jury, because their verdict would decide whether Alan's empire of lies finally crumbled, or whether Sheila's fight for justice ended here. The courtroom became the stage where Alan Blackthorne could no longer hide. After years of control, wealth, and manipulation, he now sat under the glaring eyes of a jury. The man once untouchable on Texas golf courses was forced to answer for what had happened in that Sarasota home. This was not just a trial of facts. It was a reckoning of character, of the mask he had worn for so long. Witness after witness took the stand. Friends, acquaintances, intermediaries who carried fragments of a scheme into the light. The jury listened to taped conversations, each word exposing not grief, but calculation. Financial records showed the money trail. Phone logs outlined his network. Piece by piece, the illusion Alan had spent years perfecting began to shatter, leaving behind the chilling portrait of a man who had turned his anger into a weapon. Then came the most powerful moments, when Sheila's loved ones testified, her children's future, the lives upended, the pain of a family that could never be whole again. Their voices cracked, their grief raw, filling the courtroom with silence heavier than any argument from the defense. Here, the case was no longer about paperwork or phone calls. It was about the human cost of Alan's hatred. The trial carried the weight of truth and loss in every word spoken, every testimony, every record. Every tear in that courtroom built toward a single, irreversible moment. The jury would soon decide if Alan Blackthorne's mask would finally be stripped away, or if justice would slip through the cracks once more. The courtroom fell silent as the jury filed back in. Hours of testimony, weeks of evidence, and years of unanswered questions now balanced on a single decision. When the foreman read the verdict, guilty, the silence cracked open, replaced by the sound of relief and grief. For Sheila's family, it was confirmation of what they had always known. Alan Blackthorne was the man who had orchestrated her death. The sentence was swift and final. Alan Blackthorne was given life in prison, stripped of the power and image he had spent years carefully crafting. For a man who once stood untouchable on golf courses and behind gated walls, the fall was absolute. The very control he used to torment others had slipped through his fingers, leaving him not as a wealthy developer or respected figure, but as a convicted murderer, bound to spend the rest of his life in a cell. Yet, even in that moment of justice, the victory felt hollow. Sheila's 6 children still face a future without their mother's love, without her laughter, without her guiding hand. The gavel may have closed one chapter, but it could never erase the scars left behind. For them, the life sentence was not just Alan's. It was theirs too, a lifelong burden of loss. Justice had been delivered. The truth was undeniable. But in the silence that followed, one reality lingered. Sheila was still gone, and her children would never again feel the warmth of her embrace. The gavel had ended the trial, but not the pain. And as the echoes of that verdict faded, the deeper story turned toward those left behind. The family forced to live with both the loss and the legacy of this crime. In the wake of the verdict, life did not simply move forward. For Sheila Bellush's 6 children, the world had been shattered beyond repair. They were forced to grow up without the woman who had been their anchor, their protector, their joy. The house once filled with her laughter now carried an emptiness that could never be filled. Family members stepped in, doing everything they could to provide stability. Grandparents, relatives, and loved ones rallied to raise the children, determined to give them the love and security Sheila had fought so hard to create. But the scars were undeniable. Each birthday, each holiday, each milestone was a reminder of what had been stolen, a mother's embrace, a guiding voice, a sense of safety only she could give. And it was in these quiet, everyday absences, not in the courtroom, not in the headlines, where the true weight of Alan's choices revealed themselves most brutally. Meanwhile, Alan Blackthorne's legacy stood in sharp contrast. Once admired as a successful businessman, his name had become synonymous with cruelty and destruction. He had sought to control, to punish, to erase Sheila's happiness, and in the process, erase himself from the world of freedom he valued so highly. His wealth and status, the very things he clung to, were powerless against the truth that defined him forever. A man who ordered the mother of his children murdered. Sheila's children endured, carrying their mother's memory with them as both burden and light. And while Alan lived out his days behind bars, their resilience became the true testament to her life. A reminder that love, though scarred, could outlast even the darkest acts of hatred. But beyond the children's pain and Alan's downfall lies a larger story, one that forces us to ask what Sheila's legacy truly means and what we are left to carry after such unimaginable loss. Sheila Bellush's story is not just about a crime. It is about love, control, and the ultimate act of revenge. A mother who sought nothing more than peace and safety for her children was met instead with cruelty and betrayal. Her murder reminds us that the greatest dangers sometimes come not from strangers, but from those once closest to us. Her life shines as a reminder of resilience, while her death exposes the dark consequences of unchecked obsession. When control turns into fixation and anger becomes entitlement, the results can be devastating. Sheila's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that domestic violence is not always visible. Its scars can be hidden until it is far too late. It forces us to ask, how many warning signs go unseen until the damage is irreversible? As we reflect, the questions extend beyond the courtroom and the prison walls. Alan Blackthorne lost everything in his pursuit of control, but what was truly lost can never be replaced. 6 children grew up without their mother. A family carried grief that will last a lifetime. And society was left with another painful reminder of how obsession destroys everything it touches. In the end, justice delivered a sentence. But the true cost of this crime can never be measured in years behind bars. And now, I leave a question with you. What does justice mean when a mother's life is stolen and children are left behind? Do you believe the punishment fit the crime? Share your thoughts below. And while this chapter closes, the world of true crime continues to reveal stories of deception, double lives, and the tragic cost of misplaced trust. Next time, we'll uncover another chilling story of betrayal and tragedy. Before you go, if you found this story compelling, insightful, or important, please like this video, share it with someone who cares about true crime awareness, and subscribe for more in-depth, narrative-driven documentaries. Your support helps these stories reach more people, honor the victims, and keep their memories alive.